Cool. So this is basically your Unix calendar with a few other things kind of thrown in. Um, Tomorrow you'll have your normal sprint challenge, and then in the afternoon you'll talk about your build week and kind of get started from that. And I just want to spend a minute talking about build week. So you're doing your back end for build week. And so I don't, it happens at Lambda School. It happens in industry. You've been on the other side of this where you get an assignment and, I remember one particular assignment, one application I was developing. I remember this specifically, and it's a great example of this. We had 3 months to get this thing done. Okay. So we all met, we got the requirements, we started working with the clients and all this kind of stuff. We all got together on who was going to do what. We took off. In about 2 weeks, the front end people were poking me, wanting to know where my back end was. And I'm thinking, okay, we have 3 months to get this done. Now, granted, I can't take the whole 3 months to do the back end, but I could really take more than 2 weeks. But anyway, but you've been on that end. You've been the front end people that poke the back end people. And so in a normal build week time, what I would say is be prepared on Monday to have your front end people start poking you, wanting to know where the back end is because they want to get started. What I normally recommend, if you can, and this is, I realize that we're not all in the position where we can do this, but if you can, I recommend that you get started on the back end as soon as you find out what it is. And if you can have it wrapped up, kind of, where you have kind of at least the basics of it down by Monday or Tuesday. So in this case, that is Monday or Tuesday of January. So you have a little bit of time. So it's the 4th, the 5th is what I'm talking about. If you could have a lot of your back end in place at that point, it really makes your front end people like you a whole lot better, makes for a much better project. And then really, you're just kind of sitting back Wednesday and Thursday, letting your front end people code. And sometimes you have to jump in and make a few changes, but you're kind of skating in the rest of the week. That for a back end, that's a very normal position where you do an awful lot of work up front, and then you just kind of sit around and wait for something to happen. When we come back from our 2-week break, we do have office hours, just like we've been running the office hours. Jamie's been running the office hours at, from 2:30 to whenever. For build week, we run them in the mornings because we find that interferes less with what you're doing. So we're going to have office hours from 9 to 10-ish that week that we come back, that week that's the official build week. So if you have any questions about your build week or really anything in Java, join us. Jamie and I will be switching out. I'll take the first one and then he'll do the next one and so on. But we do have those going on for you. Also, I'm not going to make any promises that I'll be able to answer questions via Slack over the holidays, but chances are, if it's like any other holiday, if you message me on Slack with a question, I'll respond. So if you're working on it over the holidays and you run into something, it's certainly worth a post to the help channel or a DM to me, and we can see how it goes. So that was the idea here, is that get started on this. It's going to make your life a lot easier. At the end of class today, I'm going to show you, there's this thing, web scaffolding training. I'm not really sure what the web people are doing with that, but I'll show you what we do in Java, and I'll show you that towards the end of class today. What we're wanting to do today in class is, at this point, really with yesterday, when we did the testing, we have a complete system up and running. We're ready to go. The one thing that we're missing is making our application available to other people. And so that is what we're going to work on right now. And what I set out in the channel was to we wanted to work with this restaurant application that we were working with yesterday. So I already have, I did not get my things at the right spots before class today. So this Java restaurants, and yesterday we worked on adding testing to this secured restaurant initial. Well, the secured restaurant has all the final tests in there that we would want to do, and it has everything in there as a complete system, except for deploying it to the cloud. And that's what we want to work on next. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this secured restaurant and we're going to deploy it to Heroku. We pick Heroku because a couple of reasons why we like Heroku. Of course, I'm still signed on. I don't want to be signed on. How do I sign out of Heroku here? Ah, perfect. Okay. You are not liking me, are you? Aha. Perfect. All right. So when you go to Heroku, this is the cloud system that we're going to use for most of our back end work here at Lambda School. And there's a couple of reasons why we use it. There's a lot of different cloud systems out there. There's Heroku, there's AWS, there's DigitalOcean. I don't know. There's a bunch of them. When we were first looking at cloud systems, we wanted to find something that worked pretty seamlessly with the code that we were doing, that worked with PostgreSQL, because that was the database that we wanted to work with, and that was free to use. And I will say this, Heroku is free to use in the fact that when you set up an Heroku account, you do not have to give it a credit card. Like I know AWS, and AWS is by far the industry leader on cloud services, and you have to give AWS a credit card when you set up. And no matter what I do on my AWS, I get charged something each month. I don't know why. It's not much. I mean, we're talking about quite often it's less than $1, but it's still something I get charged, and I haven't figured out what's going on with that. I eventually canceled it and just do everything on Heroku now. So through your GitHub student pack, you're actually given, I think it's a year or something like that. You're given some of the paid space on Heroku as well. And the big difference between the paid space and what we're going to be using is your database can be larger, and it does work better with security with HTTPS than the free version. But for our purposes, the free version is great. So that's what we're going to use. You will need an account. So if you don't have an account, you want to go sign up for one, and you can do that while I'm talking right now. If you do ever get on Heroku, if you do ever get to a spot where it's asking you for a credit card, you've gone to the wrong option. So don't give them a credit card number. Unless you want to pay for it. That's a different issue, but you don't have to give it a credit card number. So I've already signed up. So I'm just going to go on and log in. And I'm using a personal email, but it works just fine. So here's, I have a few applications that I'm currently looking at that are on Heroku. So when I initially sign on, it goes to your Heroku dashboard. And yours may be completely blank if you've never done anything on it. If you have some applications out there, well, they'll show up here. You'll notice that some of them are asleep. If you don't use your Heroku application and I forget because they've changed it recently, every so often it goes to sleep. And then when someone tries to access it, it takes about 30 seconds or so for it to wake back up. But that's not a concern. People know that. People know that, if you have a portfolio and you're linking to a spot on Heroku, they know it's going to be slow the first time they access it. So that's not something you need to worry about when you're interviewing that, it takes forever to open up my Heroku link. Yeah, people know that. Heroku is a real common thing to use for like portfolio backends and things like that. I prefer the Heroku command line interface. So I'm going to, now that I'm signed on here, I'm just going to close out of this completely. And I'm going to close out of this because I don't need that either. and I'm going to close out of that because I don't want that. Okay. I'm going to open up the restaurant application and I'm going to start making changes so that we can deploy it. All right. So I'm going to go to open, and the WEB36 Java, which is where I've been storing all of my stuff. And I want to come down here to Java restaurants. And I want to go this time to the secured restaurants. So I'm going to double click on the POM file as we've been doing, open it up as a project, and we wait till it opens up. And so this has, of course, this has all of the CRUD operations built into it, primarily for restaurant. I kind of spent the time on the restaurant one here. So it has all the CRUD operations for restaurants. When you go look at the other endpoints, like for payments, I don't have a whole lot in there. But for menus is the other one. I don't have a whole lot in there, but I do for restaurants. So it has the full CRUD operation for restaurants. It has our exception handling that we talked about on Monday. It has all of the authentication that we talked about on Tuesday. It has a full bank of tests down here that we talked about yesterday. So this is a complete application. We now just need to deploy it. So let's go do that. All right, the first thing I want to do is I want to create a spot out on Heroku to store my application. I need to create my application on Heroku before I do anything with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to a terminal prompt. And this assumes that I have the Heroku command line interface installed. And we said in a chat in the channel that a message in the channel that you needed to install it. There's information out on Canvas on how to install it. But if you come here and you just type in Heroku, you should get back a list of the options that you could have put after the word Heroku. And that means you have the command line interface installed. I will say everything that I'm going to show you that we do from the CLI can be done from inside the GUI. I prefer the CLI, so I'm going to do the CLI. All right. I'm just going to create, it doesn't really matter where I create this. I'm just going to create an application on Heroku. The first thing I have to do is I have to sign on to Heroku. And when I sign on to Heroku from here, it's this step that is going to tie IntelliJ. There's going to be a key that gets saved on your computer that's going to tie IntelliJ to Heroku, which we're going to need in just a minute. So we have to go through this step to get IntelliJ to work. So I'm going to sign on to Heroku, and it's just Heroku login. It's got a fun little sign on. It asks you to press any key to open up the browser. So what's going to happen is when I press enter, it's going to actually open up my default browser. Place to log in to the Heroku CLI. And here I need to give it, it'll sign on. If I had already been signed on, it would sign me on, but it might prompt you for your username and password, in which case you enter your username and your password and you click login. And now I'm logged in. I can close out of this page. It actually tells me I can do that. So I'm going to close out of this page. And now I'm back here and notice it says that I am logged in as me, which is exactly what I wanted. Sometimes, especially on my Windows machine, and I don't know why, but sometimes on my Windows machine, I'll go through those steps and I'll come back here and it'll still be spinning wanting me to log in. Well, I just stop the process and try it again. And usually after about 2 or 3 times, then I'm actually connected. I have no idea what's going on. I'm also running an older version of the CLI on my Windows machine, so that might be it as well. Never had that problem on my Mac. All right, so I'm going to go through. So that was the first command, and I'll give you all of these commands in a nice document when we're done here. Well, I'll post them all in a nice message, but that's the command we just did to log in. Let's create our application. So the first thing that I need to do in order to have an application on Heroku is create it. And it's Heroku create. And then I give it the name of my application. Now, Heroku applications names have to be unique across everyone on Heroku. So what I like to do for a lot of my things is I'll put my username in front of it, JRMMBA dash, and then whatever I want to call my application, and I can call it anything I want at this point. I'm just going to call this WEB36 Java. It's not real descriptive on what it does, but it's real descriptive on what it's for. So I'm just going to call it JRMMBA-Web36 Java. Now, once I do that, it's going to go out and create it. And the there is a limit of how many applications that you can have running on Heroku at any one time. And obviously I've reached my limit. So ignore me for a minute. Really, if you don't want to go out and I'm just going to go out and delete some of these because I don't need them. But if you don't want to go out and delete applications, what you can do is just create another one with a different email address. I mean, you know, we can have tons of email addresses. It's not a big deal. Delete application. It's going to ask me to type it in, which I can easily copy and paste, and I can delete it. Now it's gone. There's no way to get it back. So be careful when you do this, that this is what you really want to do. I'm going to delete one more because I know I don't want that one. JRM MBA stumps is when I'm just working on something that I know is going to be temporary. Stumps is the name of my kid's dogs, and I knew Stumps was going to live with us temporarily because he was going to move to Bellingham. So that's where that comes from. All right, let's recreate my application again. That's what I want to see. That's the host name now for my application. So instead of doing local host, like we've been doing when we want to access our application, that's the thing we're going to go to. We now need to add PostgreSQL to this because we are ultimately going to be running our deployed application on PostgreSQL. That way, with Postgres, when we shut down our application, data will stay persistent. So I need to add Postgres to this. H2 will work just out of the box, but I need to add Postgres. And there's a nice add-on for Heroku. So what I want to do is create this new add-on. That is the Heroku PostgreSQL. Now I have to tell it where I want to, which tier I want to use, and hobby-dev is the free tier. So if I put hobby-dev there, I'm not going to be charged anything. And then this you can easily find on the Heroku documentation. And Heroku on their website actually has really good documentation on how to do things, except they forget to tell you that on every command that you use, you have to tell it which application you're going to be working with. And that's just the spot they leave out on their documentation. It's the strangest thing. Took me a little bit to figure out what was going on. But you have to tell it with this -A which application you're working with. So we put this Heroku add-on. That's Heroku PostgreSQL. We put it on the free version, and we put it into that application. Now, I just want to look. This actually sets up some environment variables for us. So what I can do is I can go look at the config for my application. And it's going to show me what are the environment variables that are out there. And right now I just have one that's called database URL, and that's the link that I need to access PostgreSQL out on Heroku. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But I want to add two environment variables. I want to add the client ID and the client secret that are OAuth 2 framework is going to use. So I'm going to come back here under Restaurant Controller. I'm going to go over here to my authorization server. And notice right here, when I'm setting up my client ID and I'm setting up my client secret, I'm actually pulling that information from environment variables, OAuth client ID and OAuth client secret. I need to create those environment variables on Heroku. Heroku. Want to set what they call a config variable. It's an environment variable. They call it a config variable. It's the same thing. I want to set one, and the one I want to set first is OAuth client ID. I want to give it a value of Lambda client, and I have to tell it what application it goes to. Yay. I want to do another one. Heroku config set. This time I want to call it, whoops, come back, little fella. I want to call it OAuth client secret. And I'm going to call it Lambda secret. And I have to tell it what application it goes to. And now when I go look at my configuration, Heroku config, the application, JRM WEB36 Java. I have 3 config variables out there, the one that the system set for me and the 2 that I just set. So I am in good shape. So that's how you create an application. Now that goes pretty quick. You only have to do it once, unless you really mess up and then you delete it. Really nice thing about Heroku is that if things really go south with your application, it's no big deal to delete that one and recreate it. We end up doing that a lot, actually. Well, we have the application sitting out there on Heroku, waiting for code, waiting for the actual program. Let's go get the actual program out there. So we're back in IntelliJ. IntelliJ, well, Maven. Maven provides a nice way to connect the Maven application that we're doing in IntelliJ to Heroku. And in fact, they provide, there's a plugin. This is the first time we're adding a plugin. You know, this plugin got added by default when we created this thing, but we're going to have our own, we're going to add our own plugin. And this plugin is the thing, the piece of code that's going to connect this application to Heroku. And there's a plugin for each one of the major cloud systems that's out there. So this is the way you connect a Maven application to a cloud system. And I'm just going to give you the plugin. The plugin is Pretty standard stuff. And I have to tell you that I got the plugin from the Heroku website, made a couple of little changes to it, not much, to fit in our environment. And that's it. So all this is, I mean, this is straight boilerplate code. You should not have to change anything in here. And notice we have this Heroku Maven plugin. That is the thing that is connecting Heroku to our application. We've already signed on to Heroku, so we've already connected our computer to our account on Heroku. We did that when we did that Heroku login from the CLI. There is one other thing we have to do. We have to tell this plugin the name of our application out on Heroku. And there's a lot of different ways we can do this. What I like to do is set this final name. But not there. Wrong spot. It has to be set under build, but outside of the plugins. So this is my name. This is my name that I'm going to use. This is the name of my application, and it has to match exactly the name of that application that I created in Heroku. And you can see that I come down here and I use final name actually quite a bit in the plugin, but it's by setting it up here. That way this becomes purely boilerplate code that I'll never have to think about. I just plop it in and now I can connect to Maven. All right, so you do want to make sure you've added this right under build. We've just made a change, a pretty major change to our POM file. So what I want to do is I want to reload my Maven dependencies. So I'm going to come over here to Maven and I'm going to reload my Maven dependencies. Could have right-clicked on the POM file and done the same thing. Deployment takes a while. Depending on your internet connection and the speed of your machine, and I have a pretty good internet connection and I've got a pretty good machine that I'm working on. It usually takes, once I start the deployment process, it usually takes me a couple of minutes. You know, if it takes over like 5 minutes, we may want to take a look at what's going on, but it takes a little bit, and we will be deploying a lot. Every time you make a change in your code, you have to go through this deploy process. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but for right now, let's deploy. When you go to deploy something in Maven, by default, it runs all of the tests that are here. I don't want to do that because I don't want to take the time to do that. So by the time I deploy to Maven, I should know, but by the time I deploy to Heroku, I should know that my application is working. Now, there may be some hiccups with it working out on Heroku, that's different, but I should know it works locally. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to turn off the test. So there's this little thing here that you can click on that says toggle skip test mode. I want to turn that. I want to make sure that that is enabled, meaning that it's going to skip the testing because I don't want to take the time to do that. Now I'm going to go to Maven and I'm going to execute a Maven goal. Actually, I'm going to execute several Maven goals together. First thing I want to do is I want to do a clean. What a clean does is a clean goes out and wipes out, it basically is a rebuild of your code. It goes out and it wipes out any jar files that have been created, any class files that have been created, and it recreates them. We're going to do this on Heroku. We're going to deploy, I can't spell, Heroku. We want to deploy. And then I'm going to put this option -X, and I always put the option -X there. And that's going to give me full debugging information. And it takes a little bit longer, not a lot, but it takes a little bit longer. But the reason that I always put it in there is it's taking me so long to deploy anyway, that if something fails, I don't want to run it again. So this way it'll give me all the information that it can up front. If it all works, great, I don't need it. If it doesn't work, even better, I have it. And at this point, I'm going to press enter, and it's going to go out and it's going to do its little build process. So you'll get some warnings that are just version things they need to fix that you don't have to worry about. So this is a warning. Warnings that you get over here, you don't have to worry about. Oh, very good. Yeah. So while this is running, over here on over here on your right-hand side, you have different tabs. One of them is Maven. Under Maven, we want to make sure that we have toggled off testing. So that's there, and that should be enabled. And then we go to Maven, execute Maven goals, which is this big M that's there. And that's where we'll spend most of our time. And then this is the command, and I've posted it out on the channel. It does cache it for you. So if I have to run this again, it's already cached the last command for me. So that's kind of a nice thing. And like anything else, I mean, this could all be run from a command line. I just find it easier to run inside of IntelliJ. And this is where most people do this. All right, so it finished the build successfully. So now the question is, what's going on? Well, it stopped, right? It stopped over here. So if anything in the build process, from taking it to converting it, from taking the source code, ultimately making the jar file, and then uploading it to Heroku, that all shows up here. Once it's uploaded, now it's going to work. We need to go over to Heroku to see what's going on. So I'm going to come over here to Heroku. And that's the application that I'm currently running. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to look at, so I was on my dashboard. Go back to my dashboard. Get back. On my dashboard, I clicked on the application that I wanted. Over here under more, I'm going to go to view logs. And you'll notice this is what we would normally see in IntelliJ when we were running the thing. After we've done a build and it starts running, this is the console that we would normally see in IntelliJ. And this time we're seeing it on Heroku. And that was under view logs. Now, mine crashed. Yours probably will too. Notice that it says right here that it changed the state to crashed. That's okay. It was supposed to. Right now, what's happened is because we have told Heroku we were going to be using PostgreSQL, our application just went with whatever default was there. Well, the default is PostgreSQL according to Heroku. And since we don't have PostgreSQL set up, it's going to die. One thing that a lot of people do, one big mistake that people make is they'll come over here, they'll do their build, and then they'll go out and they'll try their application without ever looking to see what happened at Heroku. And so this is my host right here. So if I come over here to Postman, so I finished my build in IntelliJ said everything was fine. So, and this happens a lot. People will come out here now and go to Oh, what is it called? It's herokuapp.com. You would think I would memorize that. herokuapp.com. And I get back some weird error message. Even if I go to an endpoint that we know exists, I still get back some weird error message. And the point behind this is it's died. The system has crashed. The only way we knew that, though, was by going and looking at Heroku. So when it says that the system has crashed, we have to go do something. So that's our next step. We have actually several things we need to change in our application, and then we're going to redeploy, and then we'll see what happens. So here's what we want to do. That's deploying to Heroku, but we have to massage our application a little bit to get it to deploy better. So what we want to do now is we want to take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to do things in our application that'll make it work with Heroku. Few little changes we're going to make, but the changes that we make will allow it to either work on Heroku or work locally. So we're going to keep the being able to develop locally while we're pushing out to Heroku so other people can use it. All right, we are back. So let's handle the first problem that we ran into, and that was the Postgres SQL. First thing that we need to do is remember that right now we're running with just the H2 database in our application. And when we wanted to work with the H2 database in our POM file, we added a dependency for it. We added this dependency H2 database, and that allowed us to work with the H2 database. Most databases have a dependency. For instance, there's one for PostgreSQL. It's an org though. PostgreSQL, and then we want to, for the artifact, do PostgreSQL. Pretty straightforward, just like up here, we did com.h2 database. Down here, we do org.postgresql, and then we have PostgreSQL. So this allows our application to work with Postgres. Now, we're going to have to make some changes, though. What we're going to do, so we need to add that dependency to our POM file. But when I add this, I don't want to just always use Postgres. I want to be able to switch between H2, which we'll use when we're running things locally, to switch it to Postgres when we're running things deployed on Heroku. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change to my application properties. And I'm going to create my own application property that's going to allow me, just by changing the property, to switch between the two systems. So what I want to do is up at the very top here. It doesn't really matter where I put it. I'm just going to put it up at the top. I'm going to have something that says local, creating a local, my own property, run db, and it can either equal H2, or if we wanted to run Postgres, I'm going to have it be Postgres. I'm going to have it be PostgreSQL. I'm going to put the full thing there. So I'm adding this to at the top of my application properties. And then by just picking, by putting H2 here, I'll be running the H2 database, or I can switch these out and run PostgreSQL. Okay, that allows me to change it, but I have to put some code in place to get it to work, to make use of that property. So that's what I'm going to do next, is I'm actually going to put some code in place that allows us to work. Now I need to go open up, as I said, I try not to do much off the top of my head. I'm going to open up an application that's out here. So this is actually something that is, you can find out on GitHub if you want to. Actually, let's just go look at it on GitHub. So on GitHub, there is something called, what is it called? It's called Java Spring Foundation. What this foundation is, the Okta Foundation is something that we use in labs, so you don't need to worry about it till you get to labs. But for right now, what we use is we use this foundation. And this is actually a program, an application that you can start your build week process with. So you can use this to get started on the build week process, and you already have built in a bunch of testing for some of the user stuff. So if you need examples for testing, those are there. It has all of the, not test. It has all of the user authentication already built in. It has the exception handling all built in, everything that you need for that. So this is a great place to start. So you have this base of the base functionality that every backend system needs, and then you would just tack onto it what makes your backend system unique, the data that you're going to handle. What I want to do is I want to come look under this config, and there's this new file here called data source config. And what I want to do is I just want to get this entire file here, and then we're going to talk about it. This is, again, another boilerplate code that you can just pop in, and we're going to talk about it. And it's this code that's going to let us switch between H2 and Postgres. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to config, and I'm going to create this data source config. And I'm just going to paste in what I just put out in the channel. It is a configuration file, just like everything else that we've been doing in this spot. This right here allows us to read in the environment variable, the application properties variable that I created that I called local run DB. If local run DB is not defined for some reason, then I'm having my system default to H2. I should have it default to H2 with a capital, because isn't that what I called it back over here? I'm not being consistent. Well, I know, right? I think you're right. I think I put that in the wrong spot, didn't I? Thank you for pointing that out. I think I put it down here in the test one. I need to have it up here in the, you can have a different, you can have test can have its own application properties. It's not really required, but yeah, I put it in the test one and I should have put it in the production one. All right, so I called this H2 here with a capital H. I should probably be consistent, so I'm going to change that to H2. But that reads the application property. This reads the config variable from Heroku. And then we actually come down here and we pick based off of what's in this application properties. We pick whether we're going to use PostgreSQL. And then we just set it up. Now, the way I set up PostgreSQL here assumes you're running it on Heroku. So it assumes the environment variables are set up on Heroku and all of that. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you wanted to run it locally, there's quite a bit of work we have to do to get it to run locally, which we can always talk about individually if you want to, but I'm not going to take class time because normally we don't. Normally we run H2 locally. PostgreSQL is when we put it out on Heroku. Now, if we didn't pick PostgreSQL, by default, I just assume we're using H2. So then I have the information in here to do H2. And now we can switch between the two. Right now I'm set up to use H2. And so I'm just going to leave it for that for right now. There's a couple of other files a couple of other things that we have to do when we're going to Heroku to get everything to work the way we want it to. For instance, we need this, and this is already in this application. This is a simple CORS filter. This allows, up till now, we've been running our back-end system and our front-end system on the same computer, on the same host. Well, that's not practical. Normally, we are running our back-end system on one host and our front-end system on another computer. And so we have this cross origin resource sharing that we have to enable so that one computer can access information on the other one. And this is a pretty standard boilerplate class that you can plop into any machine that's going to be going out, any application that's going to be going out to Postgres. We have it set up so that anybody can do anything on your system. And that's pretty normal, especially for like portfolio things, because you don't want to restrict who's going to access your portfolio. You want everyone to be able to access it. If you did need to come in here and specifically um, tie this down to a single host or something, which you will be doing when you get to labs, um, down in here, this says which host can access it. I've said everybody. If you wanted just certain ones to access it, you could just make a list right here. So that's where this file comes from. We've added the data source. We have to make sure we've enabled cores. In our database, we have allowed us to switch between the two. There's one other thing I want to do. And that is we can use the H2 console to look at PostgreSQL, which actually I think is probably easier than using pgadmin. But in order to do that, I have to allow, again, cross origin. I have to be able to allow access to it from other computers than the one it's running on. So I want to set this to be true. That allows other computers to use H2 console to access our PostgreSQL database. All right, so we've made some pretty major changes. What we want to do now is we want to redeploy. Every time you make a code change and you want that to reflect out on Heroku, you have to go through the deploy process again. So the deploy process is come over to Maven, make sure tests are, we're skipping our test. We go to execute our Maven goal. It's been cached for us and we deploy. And now we sit back and wait. And again, I'm just still using the H2 database for this. We'll switch over to Postgres in a few minutes. And now we just wait. It's a good time to go fill up your coffee or, grab a snack or something. So my daughter got these huge coffee cups for us. I guess they're soup cups, but they work well for coffee. So I don't have to get up and get coffee. Mm. Okay, so we've deployed properly because we got the exit code of 0 here. Um, Okay, I do have a problem. I have to say this, Darren, and I have to tell him up front. I am just bugging him because I can, but I do have a problem of remembering just about every little detail that comes around. So here we go. We have Darren sitting out there with what his 32-inch monitor that we talked about the other day, and now he has his 1 GB internet. Yeah, I don't feel sorry for him. He's doing good. What is it? You can never be too well equipped. Okay. Uh, let's go. So we've deployed this, right? Let's go look at our log out on Heroku and see what's going on with that. Let's look at our log. Now we've gotten to where the state has changed to be up. And that's what we want. If our state is up, that means our application is working. So this time when I try to go to users, I get that I have an invalid token. I was playing around with stuff yesterday. So let me go get a valid token here. Okay, I certainly don't want that. All right, actually, I'm just going to go to a new tab. That will make my life easier. So it was JRM, MBA, that guy right there. Cool, unauthorized. Let's go sign on. Going to go to the OAuth 2. It's still a bearer. I can call the token anything I want. The access URL, remember, it's not localhost 2019 anymore. It is JRM-MBA-WEB36 Java Heroku app.com. My client ID and my client secret are the same. I'm going to sign on as, I don't even know who my users are for this thing. My goodness, I have to come look at my seed data to see who my users are. Let's see. It looks like we have admin. I'm just going to sign on as admin with the password. So admin. And then password here. And I'm going to get my access token. So the big thing here is your login. Remember, you have to get it away from localhost and put in your link to Heroku. And now I get back users. So it's working the way I want it to. That's great. JRM, MBA, WEB36 Java dash. How about if I just copy it? H2 console. You know, it's just one of those days. H, paste, go. There you go. So you can access the H2 console this way. Oh, it didn't default nicely. I have it in, nice thing is I'm going to have to go back and look this up because I don't remember exactly what to put there. Remember the Java database connector URL is very specific, and usually it defaults fine, but this time it decided not to. So I'm going to come back over here to my code, and I'm going to go find it in my data source config, because that's it right there. That's what I want. And now I'm signed on, and I can come look at the various things that we have going on. There's my list of users. So I can access H2 this way. All right. We're actually in pretty good shape. There's a couple of other things that we want to do to deploy. First of all, let's switch over to PostgreSQL. Let's do that first. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about an issue with Heroku. And then we'll talk about how your JavaScript people, what changes they need to do to connect to us. So that's kind of where we're headed today. But let's go work on switching over to PostgreSQL. All right, I'm going to come back over here. I don't have to do anything like stop my application or anything like that. That's going to happen automatically for me. I want to switch to using Postgres. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to make sure I am in the right application properties. I don't want to make that mistake again. Main, resources, application properties. And I'm going to switch this now to Postgres. I've made a change to my code. I have to redeploy. Even a minor change like this, I still have to redeploy. Anytime I make any changes to my code, I still have to redeploy. Make sure that's turned off. Go to Maven, commands cached, and I'm ready to go. And now we sit and wait again. While this is redeploying, one thing that happens on Heroku, quite often, in fact, I will tell you that you should restart your computer at least once a day. I usually do it 2 or 3 times a day, just because there's a lot of caching and a lot of open files and things that if you restart your machine, a lot of little problems go away. And so Heroku does that for you every night. It's not exactly at midnight Heroku time, and I can't remember where Heroku's located. It's not exactly at midnight Heroku time, but it's somewhere in a range around midnight that Heroku will restart your application for you, which is a nice feature, but it causes us a little bit of an issue that we're going to have to deal with. All right, let's go make sure we're actually running. We should be on Heroku. I want to come over here to my log. And it just opens up just fine. We're running. Let's see. We have it on Heroku. We have started. Notice that that's the port that Tomcat's running on. We don't have a choice in the matter. Heroku is going to pick it for us. So, where we were setting it to be 2019, we're just going to let Heroku pick it for us. All right. It looks like we're up and running. I wanted to look at one other thing, though, that's here that I can't find just off the top of my head. Why can't I find it? Yeah, we have Swagger going on. Okay, well, we're past where I wanted to be. Okay, well, that's all right. Okay. And we have an invalid token this time because we restarted our application. We have to request the token again because it's a different token now. So I'm still going to request the token. The big difference is this is running with Postgres. Now, we can use, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have to pull this from memory. I could not find my notes on this, and I should have them, but I have to do this from memory. So we're going to do this. We're going to give it a shot. We can sign on to Postgres to look at our Postgres database. We can sign on to Postgres using the H2 console. And that's actually a great way to look at your Postgres database that's happening out on Heroku. So we can come over here and we can switch to this generic Postgres. I need to get some information. So I'm going to come back over here to my Heroku command line interface, and I'm just going to get my config variables. Okay, so there's my config variables that I have set up. By the way, you can also get those on the Heroku GUI under settings. There's this thing here called reveal config vars, and there's our config variables for these are the same ones that it shows when we do it through the command line. And in fact, if I wanted, because what I want to do now is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say I'm going to edit this one. I'm not really going to edit it. I'm just going to copy some things from it. So what I want is, actually, I find this confusing. Okay, I'm going to have to go back to the command line. I'm sorry. I'm so used to the command line. I'm just going to have to go back to it. All right, here's the command line. I need my username and I need my password. In this database URL, this is my username. In fact, let's do this. I'm going to copy this entire thing right here. In that foundation application that's out there, if you go under application properties, do I still have that here? I don't. Did I put that under info? Okay, scratch what I was saying. Scratch that. Okay, never mind. All right, let's go back to this. This first small list right here, that's your actual username. So the first list here is your actual username. So that's what I want to put in username. The next big long thing is your password. It's your username for your database and then the password for your database. Your actual database name then is this thing right here. And I will send out, I'll have to pull it up. I've got it somewhere. I'll send out a way you can convert this. I'll send out a little form that shows you how to convert this when we're done. But that is your actual database name. That's the very last list. That's your actual database name. And that was at the very end here. Now, the only thing we're missing is your host name. Well, your host name is this guy right here. Notice they're actually running on Amazon AWS. And so your host name then is this guy right there. And now I have to make sure I get everything else right. I think. So this would be for me. You would have your own you would want to fill in, but that's basically what we're doing, I think. Let's go find out. I'm going to do a test connection, and it failed, which is not that surprising to me. Well, how did I format this wrong? Aha, it's Postgres. So ignore that guy. You know, when I'm doing these things off the top of my head, I always feel like, it's like it's like really I should be able to do this. But, not everything works out smoothly. So it is I have to now just, so what I was forgetting was that you have to say it's still Postgres SQL. So I have my username. I have to go get my password again. My password, one of the things, if you make a mistake, your password goes away and you have to go capture that again. Why? Why? What are you yelling about? I'm just going to work on this for one more minute and then I know it's something to do with, I really thought that was it. Ah, good, 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 good. I see the other thing that I did wrong. Grab my password again. All right. And that's usually the way these things work, right? You just kind of have to play around with them and eventually you'll get everything right. So finally, what it was it's the, I'm going to delete the two that are wrong here. All right. So it's Java database connection. We're doing PostgreSQL. That's our host name. That's our port. That's our database. And we got these two pieces of information from this config file. The port is always 5432. Then we needed our username and password for here. And that we got from the config as well. And once you get this set up, really, what did I do wrong? So I've got I've got that, and then this is my password. Nope, it needs that B as well. I'm being copy and pasting challenged today. Yay. Okay, so finally, we get signed on. And we can now access, this is actually our PostgreSQL database that's running out on Heroku. We're accessing it through the H2 console. And so, like I said, I will send out some documentation on how you can decode this thing right here, but it's username, password, host, database. And then we saw how you had to put the host and database together to build your connection string. And now we can come in here and we can take a look at our information. Yay. So we have this information sitting out there in PostgreSQL, and we want to keep it out there even when we restart our application or when Heroku restarts our application. We want to keep this information out there. We don't want to overwrite it. So what would happen is if we left things the way they are right now, every time Heroku, every evening, Heroku restarts your application, it would rerun all of your seed data and it would wipe out the data that's out there. That is not what we want. We're going to come back over here. So I've deployed it. It's up and running the way I want it. I even checked, I even connected to my Postgres SQL database using the H2 console. And now I want to make sure that when Heroku restarts my application tonight, that it doesn't reset all the data. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a couple of application property changes. First of all, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to change this to update. Create means that it would wipe out the database each time. Update means if you've made changes to your schema or if you've made changes to your models, go ahead and update the changes out on the database. If you haven't made any changes, leave everything alone. I'm going to put this to never, meaning do not load up, never, meaning do not load up data.sql. Now we don't have one here, but that's okay. It's still, I like to handle it anyway, but that's purely for data.sql. And yesterday we saw, we look at our seed data, we have this conditional on property that we added yesterday. So what we can do, we can add another thing here that's called command line runner enabled equals false. So if I set these guys here in my application properties, when Heroku restarts my machine, it doesn't wipe out the database. It doesn't load up data.sql. It doesn't run command line runner. So my data stays like I want it to. So we deployed it. We got it working. We came back and made these changes. We've made changes. Now we have to deploy again. So we go through those same steps that we did to deploy. But you have to do that so your data doesn't get overwritten each night, because Heroku is going to be nice and restart our system for us. But that would, if we'd left it alone, that would have wiped out our seed data. I'm going to post out in the channel. Whoops, that's not what I'm going to do. While this is doing its thing, I'm going to post out in the channel a couple of things. So this is kind of a description about what I was talking about with Heroku restarting. And if you come take a look at this, you can scroll down and you can see I have how I want to make those changes in application properties. So this is a little clunky, but it gets the job done. The other piece of information that we're missing is what are the commands that we use on Heroku? So when we want to create an Heroku application, That's what we did. We logged into Heroku. We created our application. We added PostgreSQL. We added a couple of config variables. And then from then on out, we were using the GUI to access the log. So these are two pieces of documentation that should be out in Canvas for you, but they're not there yet. All right, so we have it deployed, we have it running, so it keeps our seed data up. We can switch between H2 and Postgres by changing this application property. I think we've handled everything except how do you get your front end to work with this? The big problem with having what you'll hear in build weeks is that people are having problems accessing a Java backend. It's almost never the case is that it's a Java backend they're having problems accessing. It's OAuth 2 that they're having problems accessing. So it would be the same, they would have the same issues if Node was using OAuth 2. Come out here and look at a repository. This was actually, well, it was started by me, which if you know my JavaScript skills, you'll be very happy that a student jumped in and helped out with this. So you can see we have two people that have contributed. Christian jumped in and really made this where it's usable. So what this does is this is a JavaScript front-end system that, and he actually has some information here. He actually has, which is not there anymore. I'll have to go back and look, see what's going on. We used to be able to see a video of him walking through it, but I'll go back and take a look at this. But the big thing here is that when you go access a protected endpoint, if you don't have a, if you don't already have an access token, you need to get an access token. So if you go to log in and you don't already have an access token, you need to get one. That's what this post does right here, is it gets an access token for you. The big difference between getting a JSON web token and getting a OAuth 2 access token, the process is exactly the same. And it kind of throws people off that there's a slight change, but the process is exactly the same. The difference is how you go about getting the token. And to get the token is this part right here. The main thing is you have to add this additional header that is an authorization. You put in your client secret, your client ID, your client secret. This BTAO is going to convert this to a base 64 API key. And remember, we accept API keys as well. The content type for this, though, has to be this form. It can't be JSON. And that's just a requirement from OAuth 2. So this works. This is what's different with OAuth 2 is how you're going to get the token. After you get the token, you use it the exact same way. You send it with the bearer instead of just the token, but you use it the exact same way. So bottom line with this is that if your front end people are having trouble getting an access token, have them take a look at this. This is probably our best information that we have to come out here and work on how to connect the two together. So at the end of the day, we've got a couple of repositories that we really want to deal with. The one that we're looking at right here is the one that will work with your front end people on how to access and get an OAuth 2 token. The other one, and where you want to start, when you're working on your back end, is this Spring Foundation. And so if you'll start with this application right here for your back end system that you're working on, you'll have most of it already done. And that's what I would do. I mean, if I was working in industry, in fact, every time in industry we went to work on a new system, we would have a base that we would start from. And a lot of companies already have a base that they want you to start from. But here's our base. When you get to labs, they'll give you a different base because we use Okta to get our access tokens. We don't do it ourselves. We have a third-party system. And that's the only difference between these two. But for I would say next week, for your build week, this is the thing you really want to look at. For your afternoon module project, you're asked to deploy something is basically what it comes out to be. So that's all that I had for today was this deploying. Couple of things before we end. Remember, when we have build weeks, we do have office hours during build weeks. We do have office hours today at 2:30. Jamie will be running those. Put stuff out in the help channel, and even during build weeks, continue using your cohort Java help channel. If you need help, that's going to be your fastest way to get either Jamie or I to respond. So do that. A lot of times in build weeks, the other people that are working in build weeks don't know a whole lot about Java. So we're here. That includes when you get to labs, we're here too. So as you go through this, stay in touch. One last thing is, what do we do next? So we have a couple of weeks coming up that if you want, feel free to take them off. That's a good thing too. But if you wanted to do some work, what do you study? How do we grow from here in our Java knowledge? If you go to the very last objective, the very last full objective, understand what else a Java programmer should know. This is a list of resources that I've kind of pulled together from topics that our hiring partners have asked about. And so this is really just a dump of topics that our hiring partners have asked about and where you can find information on them. The big question though is, let's say you wanted to do something to improve your Java skills. What's the best thing you can do? Well, to improve your Java skills, the best thing you can do is to take this Udemy course. So you should be able to get it around $10 or $15. Don't ever pay full price for Udemy. And that's really the best thing you can do to improve your Java skills. That doesn't talk so much about Spring like we did. It talks a lot more about core Java, but that's really the place you want to go. So if you want to continue studying Java, that's a great place to go. The other thing you'll need to know a lot as a back-end developer is SQL. And so if you're wanting to improve your SQL knowledge, the best thing to do to continue studying SQL is not showing up. Why is it? Why can't I find it real quick? I know what I'm looking for. It's not here. That's why I can't find it. Well, that's silly. I need to fix that. The best thing to do if you want to improve your SQL knowledge, which is something that back-end people really need to know, is that website right there, and just work through that website. That'll take you through PostgreSQL, but in the process, you'll learn an awful lot about SQL as well, just generic SQL. That's the Udemy course I was talking about. This Tim guy is really good. So this is Java. The SQL is something that backend people need to know. The other thing that you'll read a lot about, whether you're doing backend or not, is AWS. Having AWS experience is really good. We can't get AWS experience, right? Because I mean, you might, if you've had experience, that's great. But if you haven't had experience, your next best thing, experience is best, but your next best thing then would be to get certifications. And AWS has some really nice certifications. And again, there's actually a really nice Udemy course out there. Why haven't I thought I had signed up for this. That must be under my other account. Because I've taken some of the courses. Um, the other thing that's really good is this AWS certification. So that's something else. Those are really the big three things that if you want to continue studying, that's kind of the area you should go. But if you have interest in particular topics, you can kind of scroll through here and see. You know, we've got some really good stuff here. All right, I'm going to go on and end at this point, and if anyone has any questions, let me know. I am going to get you some information on how to sign on to Postgres SQL using the H2 console, because that proves to be really helpful. So I'll post some stuff out in the channel later as soon as I don't have something written up about that I could find quickly. So I will add that out there. Otherwise, stay in touch. We have the sprint tomorrow is you're given a full application and you're asked to add some things to it and you're asked to deploy it. So fairly straightforward, but it does cover everything that we've done in the entire class because each week built on each other. So do make sure if you haven't done all of the different things, the different assignments out in Canvas, if you haven't done all of those this week, do go back and pick those up. I'm not really sure exactly what happens after this if you haven't done those, but I know if you've done them, things are much easier. So it's like anything else with schools. I will tell you, well, this work too. If you're asked to do something, do it. And we're going to assume you've done your best work on everything you've been asked to do. And so we're willing to then use that for anything that we want. I'm not saying that's a great answer, but basically go out and do the stuff in Canvas. All right, I'm going to go on and end. Good luck. Reach out if you need anything. Do remember over Build Week, when we come back, we'll have office hours. Keep watching the Java channel. All right. See you later. Have a good one. Stay in touch.